Hey guys, MetalJesus here, and today we are going to be taking a look at 4 brand new cartridge compilations for the Evercade handheld. Now these are in addition to the 10 other cartridge compilations that have already been released for this very cool handheld, but these are, well, stuff that I am very excited for because it's a mix of old and new. Now if you're not familiar with the Evercade handheld, let me do a little refresher on it. Basically, this was a handheld that released this year in 2020, and it's a very unique handheld in that it's, well, you can see it here. It's a size kind of similar to a PSP, but it takes physical cartridges. So they released these cartridge packs, and each one of them has a theme, whether it's for Atari or Data East or Namco or some indie game studios, but it's all designed to be very portable, but also, you know, kind of preserving the history of physical media. It's pretty awesome. And so Blaze Entertainment, the company that makes the Evercade handheld, sent me a sneak peek of 4 of the new upcoming cartridges that are going to be released, and you see them here. The first one being Xenocrisis and Tanglewood. The other 2 are Atari Lynx collections, which was a total surprise to see, and frankly I'm pretty excited for, as well as the Oliver Twins collection. And so I'm going to jump into each one of these and show some gameplay footage, as well as give you my thoughts as to which ones you might want to check out if you decide to pick these up. And so this first one I want to show here is this dual cartridge here that has Xenocrisis as well as Tanglewood. And here you see the game pack, and if you open it up, there is the physical version of that, which again is pretty awesome for physical game collectors like me. But also notice that there is a full color manual included with that. And so you see Tanglewood here, and has all the instructions, as well as a little bit of the background of the developer, tips for playing the game and stuff like that. And then for this particular manual, because it is a dual cartridge, you flip the manual over and then you get the instructions for Xenocrisis. And so the first game I want to talk about is Xenocrisis, which is a game I'm very familiar with because you can play it pretty much everywhere. It's kind of crazy. So it was originally kickstarted and blew past its goal. Now, I believe the first version that came out was for the physical Mega Drive and Genesis cartridges, which is where Reggie and I did a Let's Play a while ago and had a blast playing that, literally. But then it also came out for the Dreamcast, the Neo Geo, the PlayStation 4, the Switch, Xbox One, PC, Mac, Linux. It's pretty much everywhere. And of course, now it is on the Evercade. And as you can see here, it is an arena-style, top-down, twin-stick shooter that plays very similar to Smash TV, which is another game that I absolutely love. Great graphics, you know, those pixel style graphics, great controls. It works really well on the Evercade, runs great as you can see here. This is definitely a really fun game if you haven't played it already. I will warn you that it is tough. It is tough, but so much fun that you keep coming back to play it time and time again. Highly recommended. And then I'm checking out Tanglewood for the first time. Now, I had heard of this game, but I hadn't played it before. This was another very successful Kickstarter game that came out and pretty much blew people away, and I can see why. So you play as Nymph, and basically he is in the forest and kind of sleeps through the day and wakes up in the night, and at night, it's a very dangerous forest. And so your whole goal with this game is to try to survive through the night. And the way this game plays is very much like a traditional Genesis-style 2D platforming game, although there's a bunch of puzzle solving in here. And what's wild about this game is that it doesn't give you any instruction whatsoever. Discovering and adventuring is just part of the deal here, and it's part of its charm. So you'll notice that the creatures within the forest will help you out. So every once in a while you'll find this little puffball here, this little fluff thing, and if you push it around and plant it into this branch here, I'm not entirely sure what's going on, but basically it will grant you different powers. And so your character will get the power of flight. They'll also be able to pause time. You'll also be able to control some of the enemies in the game, all trying to survive through the night. It's a really cool game. It's very addictive. You get emotionally attached to the character because when you die in this, you're like, oh man, I could have saved him, you know? It's definitely a great game, and it's cool to see it on the Evercade. Next up is the first of two Atari Lynx game collections. Now, the first one here has a lot of stuff on it. It has 17 games included, and it's an interesting mix of games that were originally published back when the Atari Lynx was new, back in the late 80s or early 90s. Then there's also a bunch of newer stuff as well. So it's a pretty cool mix. It's all owned and released by a company called Songbird Productions. So I think that Songbird Productions bought a bunch of old Atari Lynx licenses, and now they have the legal ability to release them. And so the first game I want to talk about here is called Scrapyard Dog. And again, this was an older game that is now owned by Songbird. But basically it is a 2D platforming game where you are trying to rescue your dog that was stolen by this jerk called Mr. Big. And so what you do here is navigate the scrapyard, trying to get power-ups, take out some of the enemies that are trying to take you down. Again, all while trying to get your long-lost dog. By the way, at this point, I probably should mention that you are watching the game output via the HDMI cable on the Evercade, and it outputs at 720p. And you know, these old Atari Lynx games can look pretty rough when they're blown up, you know, on a modern display. But actually, as you see here, when you're playing it on the handheld itself, they look so much better because obviously that screen is small, and that's how they were designed, you know, back in the 90s when the Lynx was out. So just be aware that when you're playing these on the actual handheld, they look a lot better, like they should. The next game I want to talk about is called Dracula The Undead. And this is a real trip to see on a handheld because, as you can see from this gameplay footage, it plays pretty much like an old school adventure game. And so this game is based on the classic novel of Dracula, and essentially you are a character that has been invited to Dracula's castle. You're not entirely sure what's going on, but you think it's kind of weird and mysterious, and of course it is. You actually meet up with Dracula very close to the beginning of the game, but you spend a lot of time going around doing kind of adventure game stuff where you're examining things, you're picking up items, you're using them to solve puzzles, and a lot more. Now, a game like this could easily be very difficult to play on a handheld because obviously, you know, your buttons are pretty limited and you of course don't have access to a keyboard. And what they do with this game I thought was pretty clever. It's actually so clever, I'd like to see other games use it. And that is that down below there, with the hit of a button, you can actually cycle through the action that you want to take as well as the thing you want to use it against. And it's intelligent. So for instance, it knows when you're in front of something to limit the amount of choices to examine or use or pick up. I just found it actually surprisingly good to play and a lot of fun. So, you know, obviously again, the graphics are a little rough, but you know, it's actually pretty cool for the time. I mean, when this was released back, I believe in 1991, yeah, this is awesome. Here's another game I've been enjoying a lot on the handheld, and that is Crystal Mines 2. Now, this game plays a lot like classic Boulder Dash, mixed in, I guess, probably with, say, Dig Dug. In this game, you're a robot that's trying to get all of the gems within a level, all while trying to avoid the enemies and not getting crushed by all of the boulders that can fall. But this game will give you a false sense of security because it starts off fairly easy, but then around, say, maybe level 5 or so, it starts getting very tricky, but then also a lot more fun because it starts introducing smarter AI as well as different types of things that you can or cannot get through, like the different rocks and stone types. Now, what's interesting about this release is that it was originally released back in, looks like 1992, but then it was purchased by Songbird, who then added even more levels to it. So the version that you get here actually, I think, has like over 100 levels. So lots of replayability here. Here's a couple puzzle games that are included in this collection that I was having fun with. The first one being Super Skweek. And the premise of this game is pretty simple. You see that The entire level is covered with blue tiles, and you're just simply trying to turn them pink. And that sounds easier said than done, because if you notice, a lot of these tiles are specialized and have certain things. Either they respawn enemies that you can shoot, or perhaps they're only a certain direction, or sometimes they're slippery, sometimes they fade in and out, things like that. So this is a game that actually looks simple, it's easy to understand, but it is very challenging. And then here's a puzzle game released in 2004 for the Atari Lynx called Loops. Loops with a Z. So what's going on here is that you're trying to create enclosed loops. And that sounds like it'd be very simple to do. But first of all, you notice down there in the center below, it's showing you what piece is going to come up, and then it throws it up into the gameplay area, and then you can rotate it and then drop it. But you have to do it really quickly. I mean, this looks like it'd be easy, but it is not. But it's definitely addictive. I was having a lot of fun with it. Next up is a game that's considered pretty much an Atari Lynx classic when it was released back in 1993 on the handheld. That, of course, is Gordo number 106. In this game, you play a monkey named Gordo. He is number 106 in this science lab, and through a series of missteps, basically gets really smart and decides to escape and try to free all his friends in the process. And as you can see here, it is a 2D platforming game, but it's got a lot going on because the levels have a lot of variety to them. There's a lot of verticality to it, where there's stuff usually down below you as well as above. Lots of things to explore and find in this game. It's really cool. And here's a run and gun shooter called Power Factor. So this guy's got a jetpack, he's got lasers and other weapons, trying to get through the level. It's got a little bit kind of funky controls going on, especially when trying to get in the air with that jetpack, but it's cool to play and it's a lot of fun to explore. Also included on here is Super Asteroids and Super Missile Command, created for the Atari Lynx. Now, you know, Super Asteroids is cool, but I don't know, for whatever reason, I've kind of gotten burned out on Asteroids, and so the version on here is perfectly fine, but actually I spent a lot of time playing Super Missile Command. This version of Missile Command is really well designed for the Evercade. It's a little bit slower and a little bit easier to get into if you're a newbie to this game. It doesn't get crazy quite as quickly. Plus it's got some really cool upgrades that I don't remember being in the arcade, but maybe that's just me. But yeah, you can upgrade. So for instance here, you'll see that I unlocked the ability to make my explosion wider, which again helps with the game when it gets really crazy. So yeah, enjoyed this a lot. And being that there are 17 games included in this cartridge, there are a lot of games that I didn't cover. A lot of sports games and some other games that, you know, I'm either not familiar with or maybe take a little bit more time to get used to, but there's a lot of things to explore here, so definitely check it out. And then the second Atari Lynx cartridge is kind of interesting because it includes 8 games that are all published originally by the company Epyx. And so in many ways, a lot of the games that are included on here are going to be very familiar to fans of the Atari Lynx, including my personal favorite, and that is Chip's Challenge. And so your first reaction might be that this is yet another typical 1990s puzzle game. But trust me, this is actually way better than 90% of them. And so while it has you doing a lot of the things that you would do in puzzle games, which is simply just trying to exit the level by getting keys and opening doors, each level in this adds a new element that really teases your brain. It makes you think. It's awesome. Another classic Atari Lynx included in here is Todd's Adventure in Slime World. And so you see it here. It's a 2D platforming game where you navigate these underground caves looking for these jewels, picking up items, taking out enemies, all that sort of stuff. The thing that stands out with this game is the gameplay, also the animation and the variety, and also the level design. It really feels like you're exploring caves. You just want to keep pushing and playing more. There's always something new to discover. By the way, I should have probably mentioned this earlier, but the Atari Lynx handheld allowed you to play both left-handed and right-handed by flipping the screen. And actually, the Evercade continues with that. So they actually built that functionality into these games. So any of these games can be played left-handed or right-handed simply by just pressing start and the right bumper. You see it right here. It flips the screen. Pretty cool. Here is California Games. I believe this was a pack-in for the original Atari Lynx. So a lot of people who had that handheld are very familiar with this. I'm okay at this game. Some of them I'm better than others. I definitely really like the surfing in here. Surfing is so much fun. It feels natural. It's really cool to pull off the 360s and stuff like that. And then BMX is on here. It's another game I enjoy. Probably because I like these kind of games, you know, the SSX tricky type stuff, you know, doing flips and stuff like that. And then of course you have Half Pipe and also Footbag. Blue Lightning is another one that a lot of people remember on their Atari Lynx. As you can see here, it is a aerial combat game, very similar to Afterburner, has that sort of crazy speed to it, shooting down other airplanes. Yeah, I mean, at the time, this was definitely a showcase for the power of the Lynx. And again, it looks great on the handheld. Another game on here that I thought was pretty cool is called Electro Cop. And essentially what you're doing here is going through these levels, but check it out. There is a level of 3D to this where you can go forward and back on the screen here and explore deeper into levels. It's a very weird and cool effect. You know, I don't know if it necessarily works all the time because it's hard to see around corners, obviously, but again, it shows off the power of the original Lynx. By the way, a little tip for you, if you're playing this game and you got stuck trying to open up doors, well, you want to use the icebreaker, and you don't have to actually sit there and wait for it to crack the code on the door. You can just walk away and you'll hear a little noise telling you that the door is now open. So it took me a little while to figure that one out, but once you do, you'll be fine. Next up is the Oliver Twins collection, and I have to admit, while I'm familiar with the Dizzy series a little bit, I was not really familiar with the entire breadth of games that these developers have released. Turns out they've released over 50 games over the last couple decades. Everything from the NES, the Amstrad, the Spectrum, all the way up to modern systems. So this is a pretty cool collection of 11 games, both old and new. Starting off with the Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy. This was originally released back in 1991 and is considered somewhat a greatest hits version of this series because there's so many different games. This one actually has all of the main characters in there. Now, if you're not familiar with the Dizzy series, well, basically it's a 2D platforming game, but what makes it different is that it doesn't really focus on taking out or jumping on your enemies, more so as talking with different characters, which are always very funny and personable, but also then trying to solve puzzles, usually giving them something that they want that will then, you know, propel the story along and kind of let you solve different things. Now, this cartridge includes 5 Dizzy games, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do want to point out a couple of them here, including Wonderland Dizzy. So this was a game where the source code was originally thought to be lost to time, but then was rediscovered recently and then released in 2015. Now, what's cool about it is that they were able to go through and make it a little bit more beginner friendly because the early ones can be a little tough. They're definitely got that old school difficulty, but I would say if you're starting with the series, go ahead and start with Wonderland Dizzy because, again, it's just a little bit more forgiving. I believe you have infinite lives in this one, so you can explore and fail, and you're not going to get too frustrated. Another cool game in this collection is called Dreamworld Pogie. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Pogie. Now, this is technically a Dizzy game, or at least it takes place in the Dizzy world, and it definitely feels like that, but it's actually a modern release. Another one of these games where the developer started it and for whatever reason didn't finish it, found the source code and released it in 2017. So another game that, you know, if you like these 2D platforming games, yeah, you're gonna love this one too. A little bit of a surprise on here is a puzzle game called Go Dizzy Go. It's funny because, you know, in the 1990s, puzzle games were everywhere, and a lot of franchises that were not necessarily puzzle games got made into puzzle games. I'm thinking of kind of like Pac-Man got a puzzle version, and, you know, other, you know, kind of mascots from the 1990s. Well, Go Dizzy Go is a version of that. And essentially what you're trying to do is pick up all of these pieces of fruit while trying to avoid the enemies. Very simple standard stuff here, but again, it's well designed, a lot of fun. There's also some non-Disney games on here, which admittedly I probably didn't enjoy quite as much, but I do want to mention them. The first one being Firehawk, which is a shooter here. It's a helicopter shooter, which looks pretty good and plays well. It's just, you know, again, not one of my favorites. And then also you have a BMX simulator here, which is very similar to Super Sprint, as well as their first game that they ever made called Super Robin Hood, which is, you know, as you can see here, a 2D platforming game that, well, when you play this, you can definitely see the lineage of this going into Disney because it has the look and also the feel of those games. And so this cartridge pack is a nice mix of games I was somewhat familiar with, and then also having stuff in there that I've never played before and I'm just discovering for the first time. And so that's what I really like about the games that have been released on the Evercade, because it's a mix of the known games and the popular games, but also these games that you just never saw coming. You know, again, like the Atari Lynx, that's pretty much a failed handheld, yet it's highly regarded from game collectors and people who have ventured to it because it was way ahead of its time, you know? And it's cool to see those games getting a new lease on life, as well as the newer games, you know, like Xenocrisis and Tanglewood. And Blaze Entertainment has done a great job keeping the costs low. Each one of these cartridge packs is only $20, which to me seems very reasonable. You get, you know, multiple games on each one of them, so it's a good value. I do want to mention at the end here that some reviewers in the past have reported audio glitches when trying to capture HDMI footage directly off of the Evercade to an Elgato device. I've never actually experienced it myself, and all of the gameplay footage that you saw in this video was captured by me using an Elgato Game Capture HD device. So I don't know if Blaze Entertainment fixed the issue or what, but I never ran into it, so I just want to mention it in case you are a reviewer or you're a streamer and thinking about getting this. But I would love to know if you have an Evercade handheld or you're thinking of picking one up, and which cartridge packs are you going to get? Also, which ones would you like to see them release next? You know, now that they've done the Atari Lynx, well, that just opens up all sorts of possibilities. Like a Game Gear collection would be cool. Neo Geo Pocket Color would be pretty cool. So many possibilities. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.